So Leonette, we have about 32 people on. It's 6:04.
Well, let us get started.
Okay, great.
Welcome to the November meeting of the League of Women Voters of Greater Birmingham. We have another terrific program arranged by Dana Ellis. Before we jump into that, I have just a couple of short admin announcements. First of all, for our members and wannabe members, this is the time to end paying your dues. So if you've not done that, please, Ricky Tick, take care of that so that we can report our numbers to national. Also, you got your voter yesterday, and it shows that we are having a Giving Tuesday matching campaign. So if you give something to the League of Women Voters Greater Birmingham Ed Fund from today through December 31st, your donation will be doubled up to $400. So don't wait, put your donation in early, and we will have a great start to our education, to our election season in 2021 when the city of Birmingham has municipal elections. And then we will start gearing up for the big statewide races in 2022. Okay, Dana, if you could tell us a little bit about our December program and introduce our speakers for tonight, please, ma'am.
I will, thank you. And as a reminder, we are recording. So I just wanted everybody on the call to be aware of that. In terms of the December meeting, it will be on December 10th, which is also a Thursday. It will also be at 6 p.m. And we have something really exciting to talk about. At the Alabama Arise annual meeting, Barbara Cadell, who is on the call tonight, presented a voting rights advocacy proposal. And we're pleased to be able to say that this proposal was chosen by the members of Alabama Arise to be one of the priorities for 2021. It's pretty exciting. So on Thursday night, December 10th at 6, Barbara will present and educate us about that proposal, and Dev Wakely, who is a policy analyst at Alabama Arise, will be on the call as well. And so that we can be educated about the proposal and how we can all take action. So that's December. Back to tonight. I am really thrilled to have the three panelists we have on tonight to discuss voting rights restoration. I'm going to introduce them each at a time. I will monitor the questions in the chat, and I'll interrupt the speaker if it's a question that I feel needs to be answered right then. You can unmute yourself if I miss your question and you really want to ask it at that time. Otherwise, we'll hold questions till the end. Our first speaker tonight is Blair Bowie. Blair is legal counsel and Restore Your Vote manager for Campaign Legal Center in DC. Blair founded Restore Your Vote as her, oh gosh, Scatton, Blair, you're going to have to tell me if I pronounce that right, Foundation Fellowship with the CLC in 2017. Restore Your Vote fights felony disenfranchisement across the country through direct services, community empowerment, public education, advocacy, and impact litigation. In partnership with the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2018, Blair founded and directed the Alabama Voting Rights Project. To date, Blair has assisted or supervised rights restoration for more than 3,600 Alabamians with felony convictions and trained or supervised the training of nearly 3,000 Alabama citizens in rights restoration. Across the country, Restore Your Vote has run campaigns in 12 states, assisted more than 11,000 people with felonies, and trained more than 5,200 citizen activists. Blair received her JD cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, where she was a Toll Public Interest Scholar. Prior to law school, Blair worked as the democracy advocate at the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, where she lobbied on campaign finance reform, ethics reform, and voting rights. After receiving her undergraduate degree from Middlebury College in philosophy cum laude, she worked as a grassroots environmental organizer for Green Corps. So I'm going to turn it over to Blair now, who's going to discuss the current state of rights restoration in Alabama.
Thanks so much, Dana. And it's I'm so happy to see everyone. If I had known you were going to read all of that, I would have sent you something much shorter.
Well, I thought about editing it, but I didn't feel that's okay. People now know who our speaker is.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here tonight. It's since COVID began, this has been many months of not being in Alabama, and I live in Washington, D.C., but in the 3 years preceding the pandemic, I was in Alabama about every month. So I miss you all. And I'm really honored that in partnership with so many great groups around the state, that we've been able to keep doing work, and I feel still very connected to you all. So thanks for having me tonight, and having a little window of me into your homes in Alabama. So I'm gonna share my screen. So I'm gonna have a little presentation, but hopefully not just be reading from it. What I'd like to do is just start by giving a little bit of context on the history of felony disenfranchisement in Alabama, as well as across the country, where these laws came from, what they do, what's happened in Alabama over the last 100 years with regards to felony disenfranchisement, and all these recent developments that have occurred since 2017, and then what efforts have sort of been going on around the state to try to get people registered to vote and continue to reform these laws. And then I think after that, we're going to hear from Alfonzo Tucker, who's one of the people that I've had the pleasure of working with in his process for getting his rights restored. And then I know Kathy's going to talk about the League's work in particular. So hopefully this will all flow. And this first bit is just to give some big picture context. So diving in, many of you may have read about this or know a lot about the history of felony disenfranchisement, but I think it's always worth starting with the question of what is this concept anyway? Why do we even take the right to vote away from anyone in our democracy? Oftentimes you'll hear people sort of starting by saying, oh, well, this is a concept that really dates back to the English common law, where they had this notion of civil death, where if you committed a really horrible crime, you would sort of lose all of your civil rights and your rights of citizenship. It's true that that idea existed in the British common law and was sort of imported into America, but those laws were extremely rare in the United States before the Civil War, and they were reserved only for very serious and sort of crimes against the state, like treason. So we really did not have much felony disenfranchisement before the Civil War. So our story really has to start with that. As you all know, after the Civil War, the southern states had to pass new constitutions that complied with the Reconstruction amendments to the US Constitution in order to rejoin the Union. So the entire South and all the states of the Confederacy had to restructure their governments in order to comply with these new directives, that there could not be slavery, that people's equal rights could not be abridged based on race, and that the right to vote couldn't be abridged based on race. And this was something that the people in power really did not want to do. They found this notion of equality across races abhorrent, and fought extremely hard to construct constitutions that may have complied with those directives in word, but did everything they could to get around the reality of equal rights across the races, and to work really hard to enshrine white supremacy in their state governments once again. So this was a really important piece of that strategy of enshrining white supremacy, even while appearing to comply with the Reconstruction amendments, was dredging up this idea of felony disenfranchisement. The states thought that they could get around the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments by using these loopholes in each of those amendments that allowed exceptions when people were convicted of crimes. So the 13th Amendment very famously outlaws slavery, but has an exception for forced labor when people are convicted of crimes. If any of you have seen the documentary 13th, you'll be familiar with that. Well, there's a really similar loophole in the 14th Amendment that mentions felony disenfranchisement and has been interpreted as allowing felony disenfranchisement. This comes in the second section of the 14th Amendment, and I've quoted it here. But the important thing you'll see as you read this is that you should note that this section was actually designed when it was placed into the US Constitution to allow for the disenfranchisement of the leaders of the rebellion, the leaders of the Confederacy. The goal of this was to try to restructure power in the South so that the same leaders couldn't retake power. But it's been flipped on its head, essentially. So this loophole that allowed for disenfranchisement for participation in rebellion or other crime, which was meant to disenfranchise the leaders of the Confederacy, has been used to disenfranchise Black people, the very people who were intended to be reenfranchised by these amendments and given full citizenship by these amendments. So the basic formula in building these new constitutions that these framers put into place was expanding the criminal legal system in a targeted way to target Black people, to target people who had been formerly enslaved and bring them back under the net of slavery, plus disenfranchisement and stripping them of their right to vote and their right to participate based on those convictions under the system that is designed to bring them in and give them convictions for bogus made up crimes, is the way to re-enshrine white supremacy. So that was the basic formula. And you see this happening in constitutions all across the South. And after that time, there was a big struggle to re-advance, to win back the right to vote for Black people. And you saw the civil rights era go by, but felony disenfranchisement wasn't impacted by any of the civil rights acts of the 60s and 70s. So it stayed on the books. And then you see a second large expansion of the criminal justice system happening really in response to the civil rights movement. And that phase in history is termed the new Jim Crow. So we had another explosion in the criminal justice system, and then that, with reenfranchisement still sitting on the books in so many states across the country, has again led to a massive disparate impact on Black communities. So to bring this home and talk specifically about Alabama, Alabama follows this exact pattern. In the 1901 Constitutional Convention, the framers of that constitution got together and explicitly said that they were working to establish white supremacy within the state, within the limits imposed by the federal constitution. So they said openly, we're going to make a white supremacist system, but we're going to try to make it look like it complies with the US Constitution. And a big piece of that with felony disenfranchisement was, again, to make sure that they were targeting Black people with their law. And the best way for them to do that was to give as much discretion as possible to local officials to decide whether or not somebody is disenfranchised because of a crime. To do that, they came up with a phrase that is extremely vague, which they put into the Constitution, saying that anyone who's convicted of a crime of moral turpitude loses the right to vote. But they never said what that means. So effectively, it just allowed local voting officials to look at the color of the skin of the person standing in front of them and say, yours is a crime of moral turpitude and yours is not. And that stayed about the same for 84 years until there was a federal lawsuit brought saying that this phrase, crimes of moral turpitude, was intended to discriminate against Black people, and that's exactly what it does, and that violates the US Constitution. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed. They said, yes, discriminatory intent was the motivating factor in adopting that section of the Constitution. And so the Supreme Court struck that phrase out of Alabama's Constitution. Now, about 10 years later, there was a ballot initiative to put that language back into the Constitution. So the exact same language went right back in. Now, whether or not you think that 10 years of it being out of the Constitution cleanses it of its discriminatory intent is up to you. I think we say obviously not, but it's regardless of your opinions on that, it's clear that this continues to have a disparate and discriminatory impact on Black communities in Alabama today. So the next big change in Alabama's law was in 2017. The state finally passed a law that defined what moral turpitude meant. So the state recognized that this is a real problem, that there's no definition, that this is just left up to counties to decide what is or isn't a crime of moral turpitude. That creates a patchwork of unequal laws across the state. So the legislature passed a law that limits the crimes of moral turpitude to about 40 convictions. I'm going to show you on the next slide what some of those are. But this was a really big deal. The list significantly limits who is disenfranchised. Really importantly, it took off almost all drug-related crimes. The only drug-related crime that is still considered a crime of moral turpitude is trafficking, so the highest level of drug crime in Alabama. It also doesn't include a lot of third-degree convictions, took those out. The sort of counterintuitive thing about the list is that it doesn't include a lot of crimes against public trust. So many white-collar crimes, including fraud and embezzlement, are not considered crimes of moral turpitude, whereas many crimes of poverty or circumstance are considered crimes of moral turpitude. In the end, this law could have re-enfranchised more than 220,000 citizens in Alabama. So it made a huge dent in the population of people who were disenfranchised. But most people still don't know that the law has changed. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And that's one of the big challenges that we and so many other groups across the state have been trying to tackle, is getting the word out about this change in the law. And this is the list right here, and you can find this online, but it's worth noting that this list is really limited, and a lot of convictions are no longer considered crimes of moral turpitude, which means that regardless of when somebody was convicted of that crime, even if it was decades ago, they effectively never lost the right to vote. So even if they've been told in the past that they can't vote, they now can vote, as long as their conviction is not one of the ones on this list. And for folks that do have one of the convictions on the list, there's a pathway to restoration that was created in 2003, where a person who meets certain criteria can apply and has a right to have their rights restored by getting something called a certificate of eligibility to register to vote. By our estimates, there's likely between 109,000 and 135,000 Alabamians who might be eligible for certificates of eligibility. That just means that their convictions fall into the category of being a crime of moral turpitude, but not being a small subset of convictions that are very serious, for which you can only get a pardon to get your rights restored. And the big challenge, though, with certificates of eligibility, I'd say there's two big challenges. One is that most people don't know that this process exists. So even if they do meet these criteria, they don't know that they have a right to apply and get their voting rights restored. So people just assume that they can't vote ever again. And the other big challenge is that in order to get your certificate of eligibility to register to vote, you can't owe any outstanding fines, fees, or restitution.
You could hear that.
And that's a really major challenge for many people. And I'll show you some numbers on this in a moment, because most people who have these convictions do owe some amount of restitution, or fines or fees. And the effect of this is basically, if you have two people who are convicted of the same crime and one is rich and one is poor, the rich person is going to be able to buy their right to vote back, where the poor person can't. And that's wealth discrimination, and it's effectively a poll tax. So that's a really big problem with this system as it stands. And just to give you a sense of the scope of where this stands now, across the state, there's over 360,000 Alabamians who have felony convictions, which is nearly 10% of the entire voting age population. So it's very common in Alabama for people to have a felony, and very common for them to be disenfranchised as a result. This has, unsurprisingly and true to its purpose, a disproportionate impact on the Black community in Alabama. About half of the people who are disenfranchised are Black, even though Black people only make up a quarter of Alabama's population. And so the impact is that about 18%, nearly double the overall rate of disenfranchisement. About 18% of the Black voting age population is disenfranchised. And as I mentioned before, about 135,000 Alabamians have a disqualifying conviction, but might be eligible for the certificate of eligibility. However, by our estimates, only about 36,000 of those people don't owe any legal financial obligations. So those are the people who would be eligible for the certificates today. But a lot of people still owe money on their felonies. And most owe a lot. They owe between $1,000 and $5,000, which can be really insurmountable for people. And more than 20% of those people owe more than $10,000, which a lot of people really never are going to be able to pay off. And then this statistic is so important. This 2019 survey by Alabama Appleseed found that 72% of unregistered people with criminal convictions were not even aware that the law had changed. So even if their rights have been restored by the change in the law, they wouldn't know it. And again, that's something that we've been working on. So across the state, many, many groups have been working on getting the word out about this change in the law. I just wanted to highlight the Alabama Voting Rights Project, which Dana mentioned, reached a lot of people. And I think one of the important things about this work is the focus on training other people. So getting the word out. And that's why I'm so glad to see all of you here on the call tonight, because you knowing about this change in the law and having a grasp of how the system works can help more people learn about it and learn whether or not their rights have been restored. And then the last thing I just want to touch on is, there are a lot of efforts out there to change the policies behind this law. And one of the big legal challenges to Alabama's system is a federal court case, Thompson versus Alabama, which Campaign Legal Center, my organization, is representing Greater Birmingham Ministries and a number of individual clients across the state who are challenging different facets of Alabama's law. The named plaintiff is Treva Thompson. This is a picture of her right here. She was convicted of a felony over 15 years ago, a pretty petty theft crime, for which she immediately confessed and only served probation. She never served any time in prison for it. But she owes over $40,000 in restitution for a crime that only involved about $2,000. So she, is paying as much as she can every month based on the wages that she makes, and she works full time and helps take care of her grandchildren. But based on what she's paying, she wouldn't be able to pay off her restitution for 80 years. So the way she sees it, she's never going to vote again unless this law changes. And so we're really honored to represent her in court in her pushback on this law. And the other, so we're challenging the law on the grounds that it's wealth discrimination, in addition to a couple of other claims, one of which, getting back to the origins of this law, is that regardless of the period where the phrase crimes of moral turpitude was struck out of the Constitution, this law is still intentionally discriminatory, and that's enough to make it unconstitutional. I think that's all I have. So I'm going to hand it over to Alfonso, or should I go back to Dana for an introduction? Okay, back to Dana.
And of course, it took Dana a minute to get off mute. Thank you, Kathy. We do have some questions coming up, but for right now, I want to defer them to the end. We are so honored to have Mr. Tucker with us tonight. Blair and Kathy connected me with him. And Mr. Alfonzo Tucker lives in Tuscaloosa and is a leader in the Tuscaloosa County Voting Rights Restoration Coalition. He's accepted our invitation tonight to tell us about his personal experience with voting rights restoration. So, Mr. Tucker, please tell us your story.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I'm honored to be a part of this panel, and I'm quite familiar with the League of Women Voters here in Tuscaloosa. I went to several of their panels, discussion when they hosted candidates like city council, county commissioners. So I'm pretty much familiar with the Women League of Voters here. Like I said, my story really, basically, it's far as with me is I was in prison, and I read about Medgar Evers, field secretary for the NAACP, and he was voting, he was registering during that time Black people to vote. And so as I read and studied and found out about this assassination, I had a desire to come home and vote. Now, my mother and father always used to be on me about voting, but I never really took it serious until I read about Medgar Evers. And so when I came home, I was at a Martin Luther King celebration, which a state senator by the name of Charles Steele was there. And I told him what I just told the panel about how I wanted to vote and how Medgar Evers inspired me to want to come out and vote. And so he took my information down. I got a voter registration card in the mail, and I was voting late 90s all the way to 2012. And in 2013, I received a letter in the mail stating that I was convicted felon and that I could no longer vote. And so I was very discouraged and hurt by it because my family and I, we always participate, my wife and I and my children, we always go to the polls together. And so with that, like I said, I was very discouraged. And so I had a cousin of mine, Larry Tucker. He was in a group called Move to Amen at that time. And he told me about Blair Bowie and how she was helping people getting their rights back to vote. And so I went to the, I went to a church. I went to a church where they was having voter registration. And so they told me at that church that I owe $135. And so then I came about with the money, the $135, and went there, and they said I had another case, and that it was during the midterms, and that they have to get back with me for us trying to vote. So I told my cousin Larry about that situation, and he told me to give Blair a call. And so I was kind of hesitant at first, you know, kind of discouraged at the first because I'm thinking, you know, if they didn't take if the money didn't allow me to vote, then how could someone else help me? And so it was on a Saturday, and I'll never forget it. I was at the park with my grandchildren, and I gave Blair a call, and she told me to send her the receipt and the letter that they sent me, and I did. And she got back with me about maybe 20 minutes later, and I said I only owe $4. And I was kind of blown away when she told me that. And so Blair truly is a wonderful woman, in my humble opinion. She connected me with John Paul Taylor with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And me and John Paul connected, and he went to work trying to help me to get my rights back to vote. And so he was to and from Montgomery to Tuscaloosa. And eventually in 2019, I was registered to vote. And soon I got a voter registration card in the mail. And so I've been like an advocate ever since, because in 2016, they sent my son a letter saying that he was a convicted felon and he don't even have a misdemeanor. And so he couldn't even vote in 2016. My son, no, I could not vote in 2016. And so that lit a fire up under me. And so we went down there and he showed them his license and they registered him right there on the spot. But it was several people that I talked to about this situation that told me, my brother Todd Tucker for one, Terrence Gray, Roscoe Ezel, and other young males, black males that I knew that also were denied the right to vote. And so I got in touch with Blair and she helped those, her, John Paul Taylor. And so it's just been just a joy and a benefit for me, and also for me to vote in the election. The presidential election was a very honor, and I'm just excited. And now we started a group here in Tuscaloosa to help others like myself who have been disenfranchised. And we started the group, the Tuscaloosa County Voter Registration Coalition. And that group, Bill Foster, myself, Kenya Goodson, my wife, Narkita, Carrie Ash, and Alicia Graham, and Pam Foster, Bill Foster's wife, we used to meet every third Thursday at the McDonough Hughes Center. And John Paul Taylor was leading the effort at that time. And we was meeting, helping others, getting their rights back to vote. And so it has been an honor and privilege to see them get their rights restored. But I think it's all just fall back to Blair, how dedicated and how awesome she is as far as helping me and helping others getting their rights back to vote. And so like I said, I just think she truly is a wonderful woman, the real Wonder Woman, in my humble opinion, for her dedication in this cause. But it's so needed when you look at the fact that how things are going even with this election that just passed. And so I think we need advocates like Blair and others who can really help those who have no hope sometimes, feeling like they, is useless, feeling like they just disenfranchised. And so it was a big weight off my shoulder. And so I'm very thankful and grateful to her and John Paul Taylor, Campaign Legal Center, Southern Poverty Law Center, for just helping me and helping others. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. And while I'm sure that everyone that knows Blair absolutely agrees with how wonderful she is, I also want to say that I think it's just fabulous that after you worked hard to get your rights back, you turned right around to help other people. Thank you so much. We're going to go to the next phase and then we'll go to questions for everybody. Many of you on the call may already know Kathy Jones as a League of Women Voters member. She's an Alabama native, actually originally from Birmingham, which I didn't know, who got an engineering degree from UAB and a master's in system engineering from Virginia Tech, and worked as a systems engineer and project manager at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center on space flight systems development for 33 years until retiring in 2016. In the summer of 2017, Kathy organized the League of Women Voters of Tennessee Valley and served as its president until June of 2020. She was also the League's Voter Services Committee Chair through the completion of the 2020 election cycle. And at the state level, Kathy serves as the Secretary for the League of Women Voters of Alabama, the lead for the Voter Rights Restoration Team, and co-chair of the advocacy team. I am tired just reading all that. No. She considers herself very fortunate to collaborate with amazing and strong women and men dedicated to carrying out the work of the League in Alabama. And that's what Kathy's topic will be tonight, is the work of the League in Alabama.
Thank you, Dana. And I want to echo the thanks to Blair for, basically bringing these opportunities to us. And I just, your story, Alfonso, is just, it's heartbreaking, but it's also got hope in it, which is really good. I feel like that's why we're doing this. And I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. Okay. So I'm kind of focusing now on the League's part of it. And so everything we do now, we say it's pre-COVID or post-COVID. And so we started working on voting rights restoration back in the winter of 2018, when several local leagues started to try to add voter rights restoration to our portfolios. And basically that was, not quite a year after the Crimes of Moral Turpitude Definition Act was passed. And so that was when we started. And even back then, we met Blair because she was already here when we started. I heard her name from several folks here locally. And so then starting around April of 18, we started working with the Alabama Voting Rights Project Fellows. And that was for about a year. And that was really kind of kickstarted the entire state, really focusing on trying to educate and doing outreach, helping people get their voting rights back. And multiple local leagues, including the one that I was in, the Tennessee Valley League. We were involved with working with John Paul Taylor. And then in 2019, the State League of Women Voters presented the CATS Award, which is a prestigious award that we give out at our convention. And it's recognizing the individuals or organization whose work strengthens democracy, which the Alabama Voting Rights Project definitely did that. Starting that fall, the State League partnered with the Campaign Legal Center, again, Blair, to begin the collaboration to provide direct assistance to disenfranchised citizens. And that's ongoing today. And so now we get to the post-COVID. We started in December creating a team that was going to be a collaborative, cooperative team of people across the state. And our original vision was that we were going to have people in each one of the local leagues that would be able to do the voter rights restoration process as they go out and do their voter registration events. But then around March, when the state was in shutdown, we started a texting through text campaign using social media as well as some other contacts that Blair had. And so that was basically people who needed to get their rights restored were able to reach out, and then we were able to reach out and talk to them through text. And this has allowed us to reach people who, while we're at home and everybody's at home trying to stay safe, this gives us an opportunity to try to help people and keep democracy moving forward. And so since the beginning of this year, we've been contacted by about 1,000 people, and they're all in various states of getting their rights back. But let's see, I think I missed a chart. Okay, I'm going to go back to my other chart here in a minute, but I wanted to say there's about 290 people who we worked with who are eligible to directly get registered to vote. And 95 of those, estimated 95, were serve eligible. The others were still, because it's a text system, we have to basically keep going back and forth sometimes to get, to make the final contact. But it is working out. And once we get someone that's interested, then we can work with them till the end. And the second bullet is really pointing out what I think is one of the real strengths of what we've done, because our League of Women Voters, we're about voter registration, and we also are staying with the people who are asking for help. We keep coming back and working with them all the way through to where they come back. Several have come back, and even though we knew they were eligible to register to vote, they were denied their registration. And so in that situation, we've actually called the registrars, talked to them about why did you turn this person down. We've gone in and a few people have visited the registrars. And then ultimately, if we can't get satisfaction, we write a letter. And that letter was co-signed by Barbara Cadell and Blair Bowie. And it's really been pretty effective. I don't think any of our letters, all of our letters have turned into voter registrations so far, I believe. We haven't had any that where we were wrong. Our efforts have uncovered systemic problems. This letter, what I just talked about is, there is a systemic problem across the state. In different counties are interpreting the list in different ways. And in some cases, it appears that there either is lack of good training or lack of systems for them to be able to do the voting rights restoration process. And so these are success stories. Even though we're talking about problems, sometimes it is a success when you finally get to the point of saying, I understand why this is not working. And now we can focus our efforts on making it work. The previous chart, I'm gonna step back because I wanted to show you this. During the holidays, we're actually expanding our reach, trying to expand our reach across Alabama using traditional media. So we've contacted this is a partial list of newspapers that we are placing this little ad that you see here. Hopefully that people are going to start seeing it. We're trying to go into communities where maybe they don't have computer access. This is a way for us to try. And it's only one issue, which is, it's not going to be a repeat, but it gives us one more way to try to reach out. And as Alfonso mentioned, it's about connections, because if someone sees this ad and they know someone that needs help, then maybe they'll let someone know. And that's our hope, is that every time we put something out there, then it's going to bear fruit and people will start reaching out, and then we can help them, and then they can tell someone else about us. So moving on, talking about what we're planning to do now, because we're looking at Thanksgiving next week, I guess it is. It's kind of slipping up on me, but we're going to continue providing direct assistance. And that has been very successful for us. And it also gives our members, it really builds our expertise, because we've got a cadre of people now that are able to, they understand the process that has been laid out on how to do serves, how to do fines and fees remission forms, working with pardons and parole, as well as the registrar's offices. And so we're going to continue that and bring attention to the systemic issues that we're finding, and continue to write letters. We're basically going to keep calling people to account as needed. One thing we have done is we've opened up a fundraising portal, and this is our way of raising money to help pay for a lot of the expenses we have, because we do mail the forms.
Calm down. Why don't you play Legos or something?
Somebody's
lost
playing Legos. But anyway, this fundraising portal is our way to help try to offset some of the expenses that we're having, because it's not an inexpensive endeavor. And then we're also working on a collaboration with Faith in Action Alabama they've got individuals who are doing outreach, and we're looking at ways that maybe we can support them if they need someone to go do aliquot research. Then we feel like we're kind of expanding our reach by helping other organizations who are out there also looking. They're wanting other organizations that are trying to help people get their rights back. We have expertise that maybe we can offer to them. And then the next step would be, we're really also looking at advocacy. And so with voting rights restoration, there are issues with the law as it stands now. And there's also issues, we think, with training, and that includes registrars as well as people in the corrections officers in Alabama Pardons and Paroles. We want to make sure that they understand and that they implement the VRR process and appropriately and provide education to people who are coming out of the system. We've seen evidence, I've seen evidence that people just in the Pardons and Parole office, they don't understand it either. And we're also working this year with Alabama Rise, and that's what Barbara's going to talk to you some about next month. But we're working with Alabama Rise and several other social justice organizations to push for legislative fixes to the voting rights restoration program problems. And what that includes is trying to eliminate the requirement to pay for fines and fees before you get your voting rights back. And that's not to say that we're saying they don't have to pay the money back, but that should not be a prerequisite to vote. And then there's several other details in that legislation that we're trying to fix the system and maybe eliminate some of the items on the list of moral turpitudes that would make it a little bit smaller. And we would continue to work with Faith in Action Alabama to help bring the disenfranchised citizens into the advocacy process, because it's so important for them to tell their stories when we start trying to change the minds of legislators to get them to update and improve the law. Then that's what we really feel like we've got some connections that maybe we can help, working with Faith in Action, help bring the human side to this. And then on my last chart, ways that you can help. You can become a VRR warrior. That's what we call ourselves. We are directly engaging with citizens who need help. And we're also trying to normalize the public discussions of what we consider a humanitarian crisis, because voter disenfranchisement is an issue. And unless people talk about it, they don't know that so many people are being punished and hurt and never being able to participate in the democratic process. And we've got to make this normal. It's almost like a health crisis. Just keep talking about it. And we also would like for you to join us on the advocacy team, which is we're getting spun up to tackle some of the legislative issues, including voting rights restoration. And we also are looking for the local leagues to help us build advocacy through a community level grassroots activism and engagement with the other civic groups within the community. So we see that as the only way this is really going to change is if we get everyone working together and then pushing on Montgomery. And if you're able, then if you can make a donation to the Voting Rights Restoration Fund, then that will help us continue what we're doing. And that is, I think, my last slide. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thanks.
Well, I know everybody will agree that this has been just a fabulous presentation by everybody. I'm going to address some of the questions in the chat. Dory Miles wondered whether we can get a list of people whose crimes are no longer disqualifying after 2017 through a Freedom of Information request under Alabama law. And Dory, if you want to unmute yourself, I assume this means that once those who might, because their convictions were prior to 2017, they may not know that they now have the right to vote. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the intent of the question. Thank you.
Right. And so, Blair, anybody else on the call have an idea whether a FOIA request could be done?
So we used a slightly different mechanism, the National Voter Registration Act, which is a federal law that has certain public records provisions, to get a list of everyone who was purged or had their registration denied for a felony conviction prior to 2017, the state's only required to keep records going back a couple of years, so about 2 years back, and then took that list and SPLC's data folks matched it with Alicourt, so they were able to sort out which people have non-disqualifying convictions, which ones are eligible for serves, et cetera. And then a big part of the Alabama Voting Rights Project was working through that list. So the lists exist. The difficulty is contacting those people. We've done mailers, we've done direct texting, and it's part of what powers the engine that runs these Facebook ads, which is what the league has been texting. So it's something that exists, and certainly we'd be happy to share with GBM. But it's not a silver bullet, unfortunately.
And Dory had another question. In the league's experience, does the Board of Pardons and Pearls take the full amount of time allowed under law to issue the serve, or does it sometimes happen more quickly? In my experience, the individuals I worked with, they usually took almost the whole amount of time. I don't know if Kathy or Alfonso have different experiences.
I've seen it being the full, it seems like they take the full time as far as what I've seen.
And for those who don't know, when an individual submits a serve application, the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles has up to 45 days to respond.
Alfonso, did you have something you wanted to add on that? You're on mute. Alfonso, you're still on mute. If you're trying to talk, you'll need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay. What was this question? Was there a question?
With individuals that you've worked with who have completed serve applications, has it been y'all's experience in Tuscaloosa that BPP takes the full 44, 45 days before they respond?
Well, no.
Good.
We had several people who we helped. They completed the serve program, the serve paper, and sent it in, and they got back with them, from my understanding, maybe 30 days or so. But a lot of them who we helped also, it was only like a fine that they owe. One gentleman, they said he owed it, I think like $15,000. And John Paul looked it up in the Alicourt system, and it was more like 5,000. And he eventually paid the money and got his rights restored. So it depends on the person that we help, and a few of them they hadn't got back with us as far as they got their rights back, and so I think now is a delay with the serve paper down in Montgomery. And they need some help of some sort. But the people that we help, like case in point, my brother, he filled out the serve paper and he became eligible right away.
Good. Well, that's encouraging.
I was going to add that one of the things that we found, and I know Dana has seen it and a couple of other folks on our team have seen it, is that sometimes we know that a person is eligible to register to vote, and yet the registrar will send the person off to go get a serve, which is just a delaying tactic. We end up, they end up filing the CERB because they were told to by the registrar.
Hmm.
And then we'll find out that they filled it out, and then the pardons and parole will come back and say, you didn't need one of these because they knew. I mean, it's just, that's where we kind of figured that the registrar, you know, is just taking the easy way out in sometimes, and sending the person off to go get a CERB when they should have just registered them straight away.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does seem like it may be lack of knowledge. It probably is lack of knowledge, but it obviously shifts work from one agency to another, and that's really not fair to them. Kathleen has made the comment, which is the new news, that there's a new director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles as of yesterday.
Cam
Most
Ward.
of you probably know, but Cam Ward is replacing Charles Graddick as the director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles. And so we can hope that maybe we'll see some improvement there. I believe that I have covered all the questions in the chat. If I missed somebody's, or if somebody wants to, oh wait, here's a new message.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wanted to make a couple of comments. One thing, the parole board, I'm Judge Pete Johnson. I think I know a lot of you, but I'm a retired judge now, and I work for Gene Johnson primarily. But one thing that people probably aren't aware of, and it's gonna require a sympathetic judge, but judges have the authority to remit, in other words, to just forgive fines and court costs and fees, and they may, depending on the situation, if there's restitution, but in most cases there isn't restitution involved, so that if somebody's got a large fine or even a small fine, if they can't pay it and they petition the court can do that. They have the authority. They don't. It depends on who the judge is. But I've done thousands of them for folks that needed some help. And the other thing, the parole board, the parole officers, probation officers, they're pretty darn well overworked, and we don't have enough of them. So you shouldn't be discouraged that they take some time, because they really don't. They will assign a person, a parole office will assign, or in Birmingham, they probably assign one person to do them all. And so that's something, fortunately, there's 42 days, because if you didn't have the 42 days, it'd probably be a heck of a lot longer. And I'm delighted to hear that Cam Ward, who has a history of being pretty progressive, although sometimes I think he may not be as progressive as we think on sentencing issues. He also has some, maybe if he took this position, maybe he doesn't have the same ambitions that he has had in the past. But that's definitely a good step away from my friend Charlie Graddick, who probably didn't want anybody to vote.
Thank you.
We were looking forward to Cam Ward, working with Cam Ward on the Senate bill for the voting rights restoration, because we've been told that he was the reason it actually sailed through the committee last year.
Is he still in the Senate?
Well,
Or is this new position going to take him out of that?
That's my understanding, that he'll resign from his Senate seat.
Well,
well, we're hoping that we can get him to come talk to everybody about maybe who is against it and who is for it on the legislation. That's what maybe he'll tell us where all the opposition's coming from.
And I do appreciate your comment about the Board of Pardons and Paroles and the fact that the parole officers are so overworked. That's why it's so inappropriate when a registrar tells someone that they need to file a CERB and they don't need to. So that's moving work to already overworked people. but perhaps we can make some progress on that.
You know, they've got caseloads of hundreds
Right,
of clients.
right. I understand. Other questions or comments?
I would just say, Dana, that I think that there's no reason to involve the BPP in this process at all. Most states just have automatic rights restoration when people meet certain criteria. And it's just busy work for the BPP, right? It's the job of the election side, the registrars and the Secretary of State to ensure that people meet the eligibility requirements, not the BPP.
That's an excellent point, and it just feels like it's still smacking of still trying to disenfranchise as long as you can. Thanks,
Yeah,
Blair,
there's
for that.
only 2 other states have a requirement like that.
The thing
Tennessee and Wyoming.
Interesting.
The thing that struck me this past 6 months is that, you know, working with people from the beginning to the point where they got turned down, we knew they should have been registered, is that it just felt like a delaying tactic. And the fact that we actually witnessed it was because they happened to come opt in on our text, our text system. But how many people are out there trying to get their rights back, and then they get turned down by the registrar and they don't know why? And the fact is that the registrar gave them bad information. And not all of them. I mean, not every time, but if it's certain things, it's almost like a trigger that they get turned back, even though they shouldn't. And it doesn't say anything about the crime that they did. Is that they met the criteria on the list of moral turpitudes, then they deserve to get their voting rights back. And the registrar should not be trying to interpret whether they think something they ought to ask for help if they don't know.
I think that's a good point. 2 individuals that the league worked with, they started with other volunteers, wound up with me because they're from the Birmingham area, attempted to register in May. After the working through it, it finally happened in September, and neither one of them had a crime of moral turpitude on their record. So people who weren't connected with folks like us who were working with them, I don't know, I would have most likely given up. I'm not as strong as Mr. Tucker was. There's another question here from Andrew Gonzalez that's going to go right to your heart, Kathy. What are the roles and responsibilities of a VRR warrior?
Well, so a VRR warrior, for one thing, it's a league member. It doesn't have to be in the league, but for what we're doing is in the league. They would get a list of text. They would know the process. When they get someone contacting them that says, I'd like to get my rights back, then you text back and forth with them and look, you talk to them about their situation, and then see if they've got a crime that's on the list, a felony on the list of moral turpitudes. If they don't remember, then you look it up on Alicourt, and we give the training so that people understand the whole process and how to use Alicourt. But then you basically you go through the whole process, hold their hand so that if they get turned down by the registrar, then you come back to me and Blair, and we'll help you work it as far as trying to make sure that the person finally gets registered. And if they need to get a serve submitted, then we help them with that too. And then a fines and fees remission forms. And so it's kind of just basically a one-stop shop to get people their rights back. At least we get them started. If sometimes if they owe, if they haven't served all their time, or they, maybe they're on parole still, then we won't be able to get it completely through. Blair, you want to say something to add to that? Because Blair is sort of our she helps oversee some of the stuff we're doing to make sure and all of us if we have questions, we go back to Blair.
I think that's a great summary. And the only thing I'd add is that, we run really extensive trainings to get you set up on the texting app, which runs through a web browser, and trained on Alicourt. So yeah,
And by the way, we do have several guys that are members of the League of Women Voters. It's not just women. We'd love to have you join us.
And the main reason for our work that you need to be a league member is the access to Alicourt. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, that's
statement?
right. That's right, because we're working with other organizations,
Mhm.
people who need, they may not have access to Alicourt, then, if they have somebody they refer to us, then we'll help that person too.
Right.
But it's, it's, I guess, Dana, do you want to you're one of our power users. Do you want to say something about what you think of? being
Sure.
our
And we
warrior?
have, right, we have a question. One thing that I would ask, Kathy, if you would put your email address in the chat box for anybody who is a league member that would like to be trained. Or if you're not a league member, but just want more information, there's a question. We keep referring to Alicourt. And so Mary Holder has asked us what we're talking about. And that's Alicourt is the database where we can look up someone's record so that we can appropriately advise them. Kathy, you also asked me to answer another question I've already forgotten.
Oh, I just wanted you to.
Oh, the training.
I wanted you to talk about what your experiences were this past year working
Sure.
as a VRR warrior. You're one of our
Right.
lead warriors.
Well, and the training is extensive, for which I'm extremely grateful. Not only the training about the law as it stands and how we can help folks, but then the training also through text and Alicourt. But I must say that of all the different volunteer work I do, this has been some of the most rewarding. It's been frustrating at times, as I mentioned, the two people who started the process in May, and it took them till September, even though they didn't have a disqualifying felony. I've also had people send me back texts of the photograph of their voter registration card when they got it. And so that feels really good. A number of people, if you remember from Blair's presentation, there are a lot of people with minor drug offenses who believe they cannot vote. And it's absolutely not true. And just the excitement, you can feel it through even though you're not on the phone with them, on the text, they're so excited when you tell them that they can register. So it's been very rewarding work.
Yeah, Dana, I wanted to add one more thing is back in October, it wasn't a text-based service, but we went to the Day Reporting Center here in Huntsville, and we were partnering with a couple of other organizations. But the thing it was very satisfying, and I guess they had been closed since the COVID started back in when the statewide shutdowns happened. I think it was in October when the people had to report all during the same week down at the Day Reporting Center. And so we stood there and talked to people and handed out information and talked to them about, did you know you can get your rights back, if you're not on this list, and if we can help you if you are. And I thought it was really remarkable, the number of people that had no idea that they could get their voting rights back. And even the pardons and parole officers that were, when we set up, they came out and said, you're not going to find anybody here because they're all felons. And I thought, I'm like, you're wrong. I mean, it's just, you're wrong. And by the end of the week, we got about 30 people, which I thought, for a 3-day period, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it is. Nancy Sales, do you want to unmute yourself and share the experience you've put in the chat?
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. And it's likely that you will hear from me personally. My experience with this person is having heard him explain his situation to a member of the Firehouse Ministry staff, and she asked me briefly later this afternoon. It's as frustrating, maybe to some degree more frustrating than having voted for several years. In the case of this man, it was after a pardon, and had voted from something like possibly the period of time that Mr. Tucker had voted. He didn't get a letter, but he simply tried to register at the downtown courthouse, apparently lives in the Bessemer cutoff, and was told, get the Bessemer, get an application for absentee ballot. Well, it was 2 days before, before that was due back. And so he simply went to the same voting location he had been okay to vote at, and they did not deny that his address and so on were correct, but they simply said he had to go to basically back to the Board of Pardons and Paroles. That's all I know at the moment, but it is, and I know, Dana, you had spoken with someone else whom I know, who had also voted for several years, or at least in the last election, and are now this year denied.
Right.
Rather specific to both of these individuals, I believe.
Right. Well, that's a disturbing story. You'll notice in the chat box that Blair has also said that she's willing to work with this person. And so her email address is there. That's really odd that he's voted for a number of years and then told he needs to request a pardon. So we can get on that one.
Also.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Also,
go ahead, Mr. Tucker.
Yes, I just want to clarify something. My son in 2016 received a letter from the Board of Register here in Tuscaloosa County saying that he couldn't vote. My letter came from Montgomery.
Right.
Thank you.
And so with the Board of Register here, he's Alfonzo F. Tucker III. I don't have a middle initial in my name. And so when they sent him the letter saying that he was, a felon and that he couldn't vote, he eventually, like I said, applied and got his rights back. He was registered to vote. But I was telling him the fact that, they may have that on a job application saying that he was a convicted felon, which he's not, so that's why I was pushing him to go ahead on and try to show him his license and his identification so that they won't get the two to mix up. Mm-hmm. And also with the Board of Register here in Tuscaloosa County, once I paid the $135, they printed out saying that I owe for another case. And so the mix-up comes in with the Board of Register here in Tuscaloosa County as far as hindering or disenfranchising people over fines and fees. Mm-hmm. And the court system that Blair used to let me know that my case was just only $4 and I paid $135. And so I think that's what make people think. I'll give you an example. We did a voter registration clinic at Christian Community Church, Index. And the lady there was a lawyer, and she told one of the men that we were helping that he should petition the court, like the judge that just left off was saying, in order for him to, because of his fines and fees. And so, but I gave his information to Blair, and Blair, through Alicourt, told me to tell him the only thing he needed to do was just go down and register. So Alicourt system is very needed for us helping people who having trouble voting so that they can have the right information.
Right.
That's the thing where I think that's where maybe the league can provide a service. So, people need to look up, if they need someone to look it up, then we've got people who are trained to use the system.
And we're happy to help at any time. There's other community organizations such as GBM who also are working on voting rights restoration and have access to Alicourt. But any of us are willing to use our access at any time to help someone that you come into contact with.
Yes.
So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm sure the folks on the call tonight who are now aware of how complicated this process can be. For some people, it's really very simple, but some of the systemic problems we found probably boils down to failure to educate registrars appropriately. If I remember correctly, in one county, they didn't know that the law was retroactive. So if somebody registered to vote, but their conviction was prior to 2017, they were told they could not, which wasn't the case. So part of the advocacy work that you'll hear about next month, when Barbara talks about our initiative with Alabama Rise, there's several pieces to it, but one piece is the education of the registrars about how to interpret this law correctly. So, and Dory, yeah, Dory has put the phone number to GBM in the chat box as well, because they do a lot of voter rights restoration work as well. Well, it's after 7. I do want to know if there's any burning questions. If you didn't notice in the chat, Blair had put an article, a recent article that describes some of the systemic problems that we had found. And I hope that you can read that. As I said, Dory has put GBM's number in the chat box as well. I owe a real debt of gratitude to all 3 of our presenters. I think this has been a wonderful meeting, and thank you very much. Any last comments from any of the 3 presenters before I end the meeting?
Thank you very much for having us, Dana. And I really look forward to seeing several of you guys maybe coming out and joining us. You're welcome. We'd love to have you. And when you hear about advocacy next month, then you'll be even more excited. And Alfonso, you can be glad to have, we'd love to have you. I know we'd like to at some point be able to get together face to face. I hope we'll be able to have some voter drives where we all get face to face again sometime real soon.
Yes, ma'am. And also, I'd just like to thank the Women in League of Voters, Dana, for allowing me to be on the panel. And, you know, it was very rewarding, and I got some good information that I will definitely pass on.
Thank you so much. I did see one more comment asking from Latanya about she would like to learn more about how to help. So Latanya, if you can either email Kathy, or I'll put my email address in the chat box as well, or Dory's phone number at GBM. So, and I'll leave it open for a minute so that you can get it. But we are anxious to have as many people who want to do this work as possible, because you can understand from the presentation how much work still needs to be done. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, it's taken me a minute to type. So there's my email address. We have Kathy's, we have Dory's phone number. Thank you so much, everybody. Again, to the panelists and to all the participants for your great questions. And I look forward to seeing all of you again on December 10th when we talk about our voting rights advocacy efforts. I hope everybody has some nice time off next week, whether we eat turkey with family or not. I hope it will still be a great time. And Jean has reminded us the link to the video of this meeting will be on YouTube soon. So thanks, everybody. Good night.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.